My ex told me I was nothing without him. So I bought the house he said I was too weak to handle, and I didn't invite him in. I remember the silence most. Not the shouting, not the slammed doors, just the silence, thick, calculated, weaponized. That's what my marriage had become, a quiet war of looks, sighs, and the absence of kindness. When it ended, he left like a man delivering bad news, not leaving a life. "You won't last alone," he said as he packed up the last box. "You'll panic. You'll sell your soul to come crawling back." I didn't respond. There was no one left in that house worth arguing with, only echoes and the outline of furniture he'd taken with him, the kind of emptiness that makes you question whether any of it had ever been real. I rented a tiny room above an old bakery while I waited for the divorce to finalize. The walls smelled like sugar and burnt coffee. It was the first time I'd lived alone in over a decade. And yet, the quiet there wasn't cruel. It was mine. My name is Eliza Monroe. I was 42 when I finally admitted I didn't recognize my own life. On paper, things had seemed fine. I worked as a remote project manager for a healthcare startup, managed budgets, timelines, and teams of engineers across time zones. I made a good income. I was organized, efficient, but in my personal life, I was invisible. Not just to him, but eventually to myself. It's funny how you can keep functioning long after you've stopped living. One evening, scrolling through listings out of boredom, I saw it. A house, peeling paint, boarded windows, the kind of lawn that tells neighbors someone gave up. And still, something in me stirred. It was on Willow Street, a place we'd once driven past. He'd laughed at it then. Haunted, probably. You'd have to be desperate to live there. Maybe I was desperate, but not in the way he meant. I scheduled a viewing just to see it, just to remind myself I could make choices that didn't include him. The next morning, I stood in the doorway of that abandoned home and whispered to it, "I don't need perfect. I just need real." The floor creaked under my steps. The wallpaper was curling at the corners, stained from decades of humidity. But the house didn't feel empty. It felt paused, like it had been waiting for someone to see past the damage. I took pictures with my phone. I walked through every room twice. I noticed the original molding, the built-in shelves, the way the light settled in the living room around 9:30 a.m. I wasn't sure if I was falling in love or falling into madness, but I smiled for the first time in months. That night, I lay in my rented room, the scent of sugar and flour rising from below, and I stared at the pictures on my phone, zooming in on chipped paint and cracked tiles. And I felt something rise inside me. Not hope exactly, but hunger. The kind of hunger you get after years of starving without knowing it. Before I found that house, I didn't realize how long I'd been shrinking. It started slowly, the way erosion does, subtle, unnoticed at first. A skipped date night here, a backhanded compliment there. "You're lucky I put up with your moods. Don't be so sensitive." No one else would be as patient as me. And for a while, I believed him. When we first met, I was 30 and had just gotten promoted to team lead at my company. I was full of plans, ambition, and what he used to call charmingly stubborn energy. Back then, he said he loved that I was assertive, said I made people listen. 2 years later, that same voice was abrasive, embarrassing, not feminine. I learned to swallow my thoughts. When I was 35, we bought our first house together. I thought we were building something, planting roots. He saw it differently. Every decision became his. Paint colors, light fixtures, even which dishes we'd keep. I deferred to keep the peace, then forgot how to choose anything at all. And when I got promoted again, to a remote senior role that came with better hours and more flexibility, he said, "Well, now you really have no excuse not to keep the house perfect." I started cleaning during lunch breaks, answering emails while scrubbing baseboards. He never offered help, just critiques. "Missed a spot. You let this place go. You're slipping." Looking back, it was never about the chores. It was about control. He didn't hit me. He never raised his voice. And somehow that made it harder to explain to anyone why I felt so unwell all the time. Emotional abuse doesn't leave bruises, just doubts. It wasn't until the last year that the fog began to lift. I remember one moment vividly. We were at a family barbecue, his family. I brought a bottle of wine and a potato salad I made from scratch. He took both from my hands without a word and set them down, then turned to his brother and said, "She means well, but cooking's not her strength." Everyone laughed. I did too, mechanically. But that night, in the car, I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I felt nothing. No affection, no fear, just silence. Not the kind that holds peace, but the kind that echoes back at you and says, "This is not your home anymore." It took me another 5 months to leave. 5 months of secret bank accounts, Google searches on divorce laws, and empty evenings pretending things were normal. The day I told him I was filing, he stared at me like I'd just broken a law. "You're not serious," he said. "You wouldn't last a month without me." And for a moment, I almost believed him. That's what scared me most. I moved out with 2 suitcases and a rented storage unit. I left behind a house filled with things, but none of it felt like mine. Just borrowed comfort I'd paid for with pieces of myself. In those first weeks alone, I cried over everything, dropped spoons, slow Wi-Fi, songs on the radio that reminded me of road trips I now realized had only been escapes. I wasn't grieving him. I was grieving the version of me I'd lost trying to please him. That grief sat in my bones like winter. And then there was the house on Willow Street. It didn't promise healing. It didn't promise anything, but it looked like it needed someone too. That was enough. The realtor met me outside the Willow Street house just after sunrise. She was running late, apologizing, fumbling with keys. I didn't mind. I just kept looking at the porch, the warped steps, the tired shutters clinging to their hinges. "This one's been on the market almost 2 years," she said. "Most buyers don't get past the first room." She unlocked the front door. It opened with a reluctant groan. The air inside was stale and sweet. Old wood, old carpet, maybe even old dreams. Dust floated in the morning light like slow falling confetti. Everything was crooked, faded, and whispering, "I've been abandoned before." And still, I saw it. The high ceilings, the original fireplace, soot-stained but proud. The staircase with its peeling banister like an arm waiting to be held. I didn't see decay. I saw possibility. "This isn't exactly move-in ready," the realtor said, glancing at her phone. "No," I replied, "it's better." By the end of that week, I'd made an offer. Cash. Thanks to a small inheritance my mother left behind, money I'd never touched during the marriage, tucked away in a separate account he didn't know about. The offer was accepted within hours. No one else had even tried. The mortgage paperwork was signed in a quiet bank lobby with plastic plants and the hum of an old HVAC system. I signed every page like I was writing a love letter to my future self. When they handed me the keys, I didn't cry. I smiled, small, soft, private. The first time I walked through the house as its owner, I brought nothing with me. Just my phone, a thermos of coffee, and a small Bluetooth speaker. I played Nina Simone's "Feelin' Good" while I sat cross-legged on the bare wooden floor of the living room. Birds chirped outside. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. The house didn't feel haunted. It felt hushed, like it had been waiting for someone to choose it, flaws and all. The next few weeks were a blur of appointments, spreadsheets, and paint samples. I'd never renovated anything before, but I approached it the same way I managed projects at work, one problem at a time. I made a renovation timeline in a binder, color-coded, annotated. It became my sacred text. I hired a contractor for the foundation repairs and plumbing, non-negotiables. But the rest? I wanted to do it myself. The first thing I tackled was the kitchen. I tore down the sagging cabinets with my bare hands, tile shards flying as I pried up the stained floor. I worked until my arms ached, until my hands blistered, until the sweat stung my eyes. And then I'd shower, drink chamomile tea, and fall asleep under a single blanket on a borrowed air mattress. Each room I stripped and rebuilt felt like shedding old skin. I learned how to sand wood, how to patch drywall, how to rewire a light fixture without electrocuting myself. YouTube became my second home. The local hardware store employees knew me by name by week 3. I never rushed. There was something deeply healing in the process. I worked with calm, with purpose, not to forget the past, but to outgrow it. On Sundays, I'd sit on the front steps with my coffee, watching neighbors walk their dogs or mow their lawns. Some waved, some just stared. I didn't mind. I wasn't doing this to be seen. I was doing this to see myself again. One evening, while repainting the living room a soft shade of sage green, I found an old photo behind the mantel, a black and white image of a woman in a 1950s dress holding a baby outside the same house, before the rot, before the neglect. I taped it to the wall as a reminder. Every house holds stories. I was just starting mine. By month 4, the air mattress was replaced with a real bed. The floors were polished. The kitchen gleamed with new cabinets and brass handles. I'd even painted the front door a bold teal color, a small rebellion against the beige life I'd left behind. People say a house can't save you. They're right. But it can witness your becoming. By the 5th month, the transformation was undeniable. The house was still modest, small by modern standards, nothing extravagant, but it radiated presence. It stood straighter. It breathed. And so did I. I never posted pictures online, never sent updates, not even to old friends. I wasn't building a gallery. I was building a life, quietly, intentionally, outside the gaze of anyone who might measure my worth by their own metrics, especially him. He had always measured everything: money, status, obedience. Love was conditional, affection, transactional, and control, that was his currency of choice. That's why I never gave him the satisfaction of seeing me struggle. I had no interest in drama, no desire to make a scene, but I did allow myself the occasional fantasy. Him scrolling Instagram, wondering what I was doing, clicking on my profile. Nothing new, no stories, no signs of collapse, just silence. Let him wonder. Each project I completed felt like an act of restoration, not just for the house, but for the parts of myself he'd tried to erase. When I refurbished the old clawfoot tub, I took long baths every Sunday night, lighting candles, soaking with lavender salts, and reading novels I'd once hidden from him because he said fiction was a waste of time. When I stripped the wallpaper in the master bedroom, I painted the walls a soft off-white and hung linen curtains that fluttered when the window was open. I bought myself fresh flowers every Saturday morning. Sunflowers, usually. He used to say they were too loud. I let them bloom anyway. I started cooking again. Not rushed meals, but slow, savory dishes. Risottos, roasted vegetables, lemony chicken soup from scratch. I played jazz while I cooked and danced barefoot across the tile floors, the way I used to before I'd been told I took up too much space. I kept a journal. Each entry started with the same line. Today, I chose peace over proving anything. Because that's what this was, a quiet protest, a life rebuilt not to show him what he lost, but to reclaim what I almost forgot I deserved. And yet, the revenge was there. Not the bitter, vengeful kind, the elegant, undeniable kind, the kind that doesn't yell, it glows. Neighbors began to stop by. Can't believe how fast you turned this place around. You really gave her life again. I always said this house just needed the right person. They didn't know my story. They didn't need to. The house spoke for itself. I created rituals. Every morning I made coffee and sipped it on the porch, rain or shine. I watched birds land on the fence I had repainted in late spring, a soft gray blue that reminded me of quiet mornings in Maine, where my mother once took me as a child. Every evening, I lit the hallway sconces he would have deemed excessive and walked barefoot through the house to close the windows one by one, listening to the floorboards creak in familiar rhythms. This place wasn't just shelter, it was ceremony. And then, one afternoon in early summer, it happened. I was in the front yard, trimming back a row of wild hydrangeas I'd planted 2 months prior, when I heard someone call my name. Eliza? I turned slowly, wiping sweat from my brow. There he was, Thomas. He looked smaller, not physically, but spiritually, like someone who hadn't realized the world moved on without him. He stared at the house behind me, blinking. "This is where you live now?" he asked. I nodded, calm. "Yes." He glanced around. "You bought this place?" I did. "You fixed it up?" "Yes." There was a long silence. I could see him trying to make sense of it, trying to fit this version of me into the narrative he'd built. The helpless ex, the emotional wreck, the woman who couldn't survive without his guidance. He couldn't find her. How'd you afford it?" he asked. I smiled politely. "Careful saving, planning, a little help from my mother's estate." He looked at the porch swing, at the clean lines of the roof, at the flowers. "You really did all this alone?" he asked. I paused, then replied, "No." The house helped. He didn't laugh. He didn't know how. I could feel the questions stacking behind his eyes. Had I met someone else? Was I happy? Had I ever really needed him? But I didn't offer answers. I didn't need to. We stood in silence, two people who once shared a bed and a mortgage, now strangers tethered only by memory. "Well," he said finally, shifting his weight, "it's nice. Really nice." "Thank you," I said, already turning back to the hydrangeas. He waited for something else, a question, a crack, a plea, but I gave him nothing because I wasn't angry anymore. I was finished, and sometimes that's the most devastating revenge of all. A week after that unexpected encounter, I saw him again. It was a Sunday morning, early, just after sunrise. I'd gone out for a walk, a new ritual I'd started once the mornings turned warm and golden. The sidewalks were still wet from the sprinklers, and the air smelled faintly of jasmine. I turned the corner at the edge of Willow Street and nearly bumped into him. "Eliza," he said again, like before, as if saying my name might reattach him to the version of me he remembered. This time, he wasn't surprised to see me. He was studying me. "You always were an early riser," he said. I nodded. "Some things stick." He looked tired. His clothes were nice, but wrinkled in a way that suggested he didn't care much about them anymore. Or maybe no one else did. "How's work?" I asked. He shrugged. "Busy, same stuff, too many meetings, too little time." He didn't ask about my job. He never really liked what I did anyway. Said it was technical, but not impressive. Said no one understood it, so it didn't really count. He hesitated. Then, "I've been thinking a lot lately." I said nothing. I wasn't the easiest person to live with. Still, I stayed silent. "I don't know why I was like that. You didn't deserve—" He stopped himself, looked down at his hands. "I just didn't expect you to land on your feet like this." That made me pause, like this. What did he see? A woman in soft linen pants with clean skin and clear eyes, a house that stood calm behind her, a life that didn't include him and didn't seem to need replacing what he'd taken. "I didn't land," I said quietly. "I built." He swallowed hard. "I thought you'd fall apart," he admitted. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I really did." "I know," I said. We stood there in the middle of the sidewalk under a row of maple trees that had just started to blush with early autumn. He looked at me like a man watching a ship disappear beyond the horizon, and I looked at him the way you look at something you once begged to keep, before realizing it was never yours to begin with. There was nothing left to say. He nodded once gently and walked past me. I didn't turn to watch him go. Instead, I looked up at the sky, soft pink and pale gold, and whispered a quiet thank you. Not to him, to myself, for leaving, for staying gone, for choosing the long, slow work of healing over the fast fix of going back, for not falling apart, even when it would have been easier. That night, I sat in the living room with the windows open. A soft breeze moved through the curtains like breath. The house was quiet, not silent the way my old house had been, but peaceful, settled. I lit one candle, poured one glass of wine, and I let the silence wrap around me like a favorite sweater. The confrontation hadn't shaken me. In fact, it confirmed something I hadn't fully articulated. I no longer measured my progress by his surprise. I no longer needed to be anything in relation to him. I was just me, Eliza Monroe, 43, homeowner, project manager, builder of lives, one wall at a time. There was a journal I kept now, one I'd started the day I moved in. In it, I tracked things that once would have seemed too small to matter. The hydrangeas bloomed today, 4 buds this time. A neighbor left a basket of peaches by the door. No note. I sat on the porch and didn't think about the past for a full 20 minutes. That last one was a milestone. Healing doesn't look the way you think it will. It's not a clean break. It's not one good cry and then relief. It's unsexy and slow. It's remembering not to flinch when you drop a glass. It's letting yourself sleep in on a Saturday without guilt. It's building shelves without asking anyone if they look straight. It's waking up one morning and realizing you haven't thought about him in weeks. And when you do, it doesn't sting. It just passes, like weather. There were moments I used to rehearse, me succeeding in front of him, making him regret, making him chase. But now, those moments didn't interest me. My dream house wasn't a trophy. It wasn't a weapon. It was a shelter. One I'd made with my own hands, in my own time, with no one watching but the walls and the moonlight. And yet, I was proud. Not proud like a performance. Proud like a tree. Tall because that's what trees do when they're not cut down. I'd started painting again. Small watercolors, nothing ambitious, just gestures of light and color. I lined them up along the hallway wall, the same wall where I'd once taped that black and white photo of the woman holding her baby. Some days I imagined she was proud of me too, whoever she was. One afternoon, while trimming the yard, a teenage girl from down the street walked by and paused. "Your house looks like a magazine," she said. I smiled. It looked like a haunted mansion 6 months ago. She laughed. "Now it looks like magic." After she left, I stood there a while staring at the porch, the front door, the windows, the way the house held light. She wasn't wrong, but the real magic wasn't in the paint or the polished wood. It was in what it symbolized. I had once been convinced that without him, I'd disappear. Instead, I became fully visible for the first time. I spent my next birthday here, alone by choice. I made myself lemon cake and opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving since the move. I played music, lit candles, and danced barefoot on the new hardwood floors. No performance, no audience. Just me, my home, and the quiet joy of belonging to myself. When people ask what changed me, I don't mention the divorce. I tell them about the door I painted teal, the shelves I hung crooked the first time, the nails I hammered with trembling hands, the plants I didn't know how to care for, that grew anyway. And sometimes I say this, he thought I'd fall apart, but I didn't. I just started over with no witnesses, no applause, and no permission needed. And in doing so, I bought my dream house. If you've ever been told you're not strong enough without someone, just wait until you see what silence and self-respect can build. Subscribe for more real stories of quiet revenge and powerful reinvention.